On a sweltering Friday night in Charleston's Harbor District, Owen Marlowe, a single father, working a second shift just to cover his daughter's school fees, spotted a well-dressed woman stumbling out of an upscale restaurant. Two men in summer suits closing in behind her like they already owned the night. He didn't know her. He owed her nothing. But he stopped his car, stepped out, and told the men her ride had arrived. One act of kindness, one business card left on her nightstand, and the next morning, the most powerful woman in Charleston's creative industry woke up realizing the stranger who'd saved her was the same man she'd been quietly searching for years. If you're new here and you love stories about quiet people who turn out to be extraordinary, subscribe and stay a while. There's a lot more where this came from. Owen Marlowe didn't look like a man who had once commanded rooms. He looked like a man who had learned to disappear inside them. Tall, lean, with sun-worn skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. He moved through the morning crowd at Blue Heron Roastery with the quiet efficiency of someone who had long since stopped expecting the day to surprise him. His cotton shirt was faded at the shoulders. His sneakers were worn through at the heel. He smiled at regulars, refilled cups without being asked, and never once mentioned that 8 years ago, he had been one of the most promising creative strategists in Charleston's media industry. That version of Owen Marlowe was gone. It had been buried on a Tuesday afternoon when Harborline Strategies, the city's largest media conglomerate, called him into a glass-walled conference room and told him in front of 5 witnesses that security footage showed his employee badge accessing the server room at midnight. That confidential campaign data had been copied, that effective immediately, his employment was terminated. Owen had told them he wasn't there. He had said it calmly, then desperately, then in writing, then through a lawyer he could barely afford. No one listened. What happened next moved fast, the way disasters always do. The industry is small. Word spread before he could get ahead of it. Job interviews ended within minutes when his name was recognized. Clients he'd worked with for years stopped returning calls. The campaign he had spent 8 months building a coastal rebranding concept he'd called Summer Current, built around the imagery of harbor light and community renewal, was quietly absorbed into Harborline's portfolio and relaunched under someone else's name. That someone else was Serafina Vale. She had been his fiancée. She had been carrying his child. She had also been the one who told Harborline's board in a formal written statement that she had witnessed Owen behaving erratically in the weeks before the incident. After the termination, Serafina disappeared from his life with a speed that told him the exit had been planned. Months later, he received legal notice that she intended to place the baby for adoption. Owen had spent every remaining dollar he had, savings the sale of his car, a loan from his neighbor Caleb Rourke that he was still paying back, to establish paternity, challenge the filing, and bring his daughter home. Her name was Lila. She was 7 years old now, which meant the 9 months Owen had spent fighting for her before she was even born, followed by her first year of life, accounted for the gap between his termination and where they stood today. 8 years gone, 1 daughter gained. The math was brutal in all directions. Lila had her father's brown eyes and a habit of narrating the behavior of tide pool creatures as though conducting a nature documentary. She had recently been nominated for a summer program at Seabrook Young Scholars Academy, a marine science track for gifted children, and the tuition cost more than Owen made in 2 months of combined work. He drove deliveries for Sunbay couriers during the day. He worked the roastery on weekends. At night, he took freelance design jobs, menus flyers, event posters for small businesses along the waterfront. He did not complain about any of it. Lila was worth every hour. The night it changed began like every other Friday in July. Charleston in midsummer was a city that refused to cool down. Even after 10 at night, the air sat heavy and salt-thick off the harbor, the kind of heat that made the lights along the waterfront blur at the edges. Owen had picked up an extra rideshare shift after his delivery route. The Seabrook tuition deadline was 6 weeks out, and the number in his bank account had not stopped bothering him since breakfast. He was working the restaurant corridor near the river, when he saw her. She came through the front doors of the gilded pier at an unsteady angle. One hand gripping the doorframe, the other pressed flat against her sternum, like she was trying to hold herself together. She was dressed for a business dinner. Cream linen suit, dark hair half fallen from a loose updo, a leather portfolio bag clutched against her side. She was clearly intelligent. She was clearly accomplished. And she was clearly in no condition to handle the two men in summer suits who followed her out and began positioning themselves on either side of her with the casual confidence of people who were used to getting what they wanted. Owen watched the doorman glance over and look away. He pulled his car to the curb, stepped out, and called across the sidewalk in a voice that was calm and carrying. "Ma'am, your ride's here." She looked up. For a moment, she just stared at him, confused, trying to process. And then something shifted in her expression. She understood. One of the men stepped forward. "She didn't call a car. The app shows a confirmed pickup at this address," Owen said, holding up his phone with the screen facing outward. He didn't break eye contact with the man. "I can file a passenger interference report from right here if that's more convenient for you." A beat of silence. Then the men exchanged a look and left. She made it to the car without assistance, though only barely. Once the door was closed, she exhaled slowly and pressed her head back against the seat. "I don't actually know you," she said. "No," Owen agreed, pulling into traffic. "Where do you live?" she told him. He drove. Her name, she offered, somewhere along the way, was Adeline Mercer. She'd had a negotiation go badly. She didn't elaborate, and he didn't ask. When they reached the renovated cottage on Harbor Garden Lane, he found her key in the front pocket of her portfolio bag. Got the door open, set a glass of cold water and 2 ibuprofen on the kitchen table, and switched on the ceiling fan against the still, humid air. He was back at the door in under 4 minutes. "You don't have to," she started. "Get some sleep," he said. "Lock up after me." He left his business card on the entryway table. On the back, in handwriting that was neater than his general appearance suggested, he'd written, "Hope the morning is easier. Oh." Adeline Mercer woke the next day to bright light, a moderate headache, and the distinct awareness that she had been treated with more basic decency by a stranger than by anyone in that restaurant the night before. She was the CEO of Maris & Finch Creative, a mid-sized agency that had recently opened a Charleston branch. She was 41, precise, and not easily caught off guard. She ran the rideshare receipt. She found the name, Owen Marlowe. She sat with that for a long moment. She knew that name, and not just from the night before. 3 years earlier, while researching a case study on coastal rebranding campaigns for an industry panel, she had noticed that the conceptual DNA of a Harborline campaign called Summer Current was inconsistent with everything else the company had ever produced. It was too specific, too felt. It didn't match their house style before or after. She had flagged it internally, looked into the termination filing attached to the campaign's history, and hit a wall of sealed documents and unresponsive HR contacts. She had let it go because she had no leverage and no witness. Now she was holding a business card with his handwriting on it. She turned it over in her fingers. Hope the morning is easier. She picked up her phone. She found him 3 days later. Adeline hadn't called the number on the card. Not yet. Instead, she'd done what she always did when something didn't sit right. She gathered information first. She pulled the old Harborline press records, cross-referenced the Summer Current campaign launch date against Owen Marlowe's termination filing, and noted, not for the first time, that the timeline had always been uncomfortably tight. A man steals data on a Tuesday, gets caught on a Wednesday. And by the following month, his entire concept is in production, under a different name. It was possible. It was also the kind of possible that required a great deal of convenient cooperation from a great many people. She walked into Blue Heron Roastery on a Tuesday morning in a pale blue summer dress and ordered a black coffee. Owen saw her the moment she came through the door. He didn't react. He finished tamping the portafilter, pulled the shot, and set the cup on the counter with the same unhurried ease he applied to everything. She sat at the end of the bar. Neither of them acknowledged that they had already met. It was a canvas tote bag that changed things. Owen had tucked it under the counter before his shift, and when he reached for a cleaning cloth, it tipped sideways and spilled printed mock-ups, hand-sketched layouts, color studies on cardstock. A full set of visual concepts for what appeared to be a coastal conservation campaign. Adeline was closer than he realized. She reached down and picked up one of the boards before he could gather them. She didn't hand it back immediately. The work was exceptional, not in a polished, committee-approved way, in the way that things are exceptional when a single person has thought about them deeply and alone. The color language was specific without being precious. The copy lines were short and true. It felt like the Carolina coast actually felt, not like a stock photograph of it. "These are yours?" she asked. "Pro bono work," he said. "Local conservancy group." She set the board down and looked at him directly. "I'm opening a campaign for Maris and Finch's Coastal Preservation Initiative. I need a lead creative. I'd like it to be you." Owen was quiet for a moment. He knew the name Maris and Finch. He also knew that Benedict Crow, the man who had signed his termination letter, was in active partnership discussions with them. Taking this job meant stepping back into the orbit of everyone he had spent 8 years avoiding. It meant visibility. It meant risk. It also meant enough money to cover Lila's tuition, with some left over. "I work independently," he said finally. "No agency contracts, project only." "That works," Adeline said. "And I don't discuss my history with Harborline." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking you to." It wasn't entirely true she suspected he knew that, but it was what the moment required, and she said it without flinching. Owen studied her for another second, then nodded once and wrote his rate on the back of a napkin. It was lower than she would have expected from someone of his ability. She didn't comment on that either. He told Lila that evening that he'd picked up a new project. She was at the kitchen table with a half-finished drawing of a horseshoe crab, and she looked up with the particular alertness she reserved for news she sensed was more significant than it was being presented. "Is it a good one?" she asked. Owen looked at his daughter, her careful eyes, her ink-stained fingers, the acceptance letter from Seabrook still folded on the counter behind her. "I think it might be," he said. The campaign came together faster than either of them expected. Owen worked the way Adeline had suspected he would. Quietly, thoroughly, without needing to be managed. He submitted the first round of concepts on a Thursday morning, a visual identity built around the quality of light on the Carolina coast at different hours of the day. The particular gold of 7 a.m. over the water, the flat silver of mid-afternoon, the deep amber that settled over the harbor at dusk. The typography was clean, the copy was honest. It didn't try to sell the ocean. It tried to remind people they already loved it. Adeline approved the direction in a single round. In the third week, Lila's summer science fair fell on a Saturday afternoon at Seabrook's outdoor pavilion. Owen had mentioned it once offhandedly while dropping off revised files. Adeline found herself there anyway, standing at the edge of a row of display boards while a 7-year-old in a sun hat explained the structural function of coastal dune ecosystems with the focused authority of someone twice her age. She stayed for the whole presentation. Afterward, Lila asked her if she thought sand crabs were underappreciated as a species. Adeline said she thought they probably were. Lila nodded seriously and said she was working on a letter to the State Environmental Board about it. On the walk back to the parking lot, Owen said nothing about the fact that Adeline had come. She said nothing about it either. But something had shifted, the way things shift when a person sees someone you love treated with genuine attention, rather than polite tolerance. They started talking more, not about work, about other things, about the city, about the specific aggravation of Charleston summers, about books and bad coffee, and the particular loneliness of being responsible for someone else's entire world. They walked along the waterfront one evening when the heat had finally broken slightly and the harbor was going dark and quiet. Owen was careful still, but for the first time in a long time, he was present in a conversation rather than simply enduring one. Then Benedict Crowe arrived in Charleston. He came for the partnership talks, 3 days of meetings at the Marison Finch offices, escorted in each morning in a linen blazer and the absolute assurance of a man who had never once been held accountable for anything. Owen saw him through the glass lobby on a Wednesday and went still in the way that prey animals go still. Benedict noticed him a moment later, and his expression moved through surprise and into something harder and more deliberate. That same week, Owen picked up fragments of a conversation he wasn't meant to hear. Benedict in the hallway. A lowered voice, Serafina Vale's name mentioned, alongside the Glass Pavilion event guest list. She was coming to Charleston as a media representative for her family's firm. She would be in the same room as Owen before the month was out. 2 days later, a plain envelope arrived at Sunbay Courier's, addressed to Owen. No return address. Inside was a single card printed in a plain font. "You've had a quiet life. Don't make us remind Charleston who you used to be." Owen stood in the Sunbay parking lot and read it twice. Then he folded it, put it in his jacket pocket, and finished his shift. He didn't tell Adeline that night, or the next day. He told himself it was because there was nothing to tell yet. But the truth was simpler and less comfortable. For 8 years, silence had been the only thing that worked. Silence had let him build something small and functional and safe. Noise had cost him everything once before, and some part of him still believed, despite all evidence, that the danger had already found him, that if he stayed quiet enough, it would pass. It didn't pass. By the end of the following week, Sunbay Couriers had received an anonymous complaint about one of their contractors, and Owen's hours were under review. The owner of Blue Heron Roastery pulled him aside on a Sunday morning and told him with genuine discomfort that an investor he couldn't afford to lose had raised concerns about a staff member's background. He'd have to cut Owen's weekend shifts to 1. Owen nodded and said he understood, and thanked the man for telling him directly. He drove home in silence, parked in front of his building, and sat in the car for a while, watching the light change on the water at the end of the street. Then he went upstairs to make dinner for his daughter. Adeline found the envelope. She hadn't been looking for it. Owen had set his jacket over the back of a chair in the Marison Finch conference room, and it had slipped out when the jacket shifted. She read it once, set it down on the table, and when Owen came back into the room with 2 cups of coffee, she was standing with her arms crossed and an expression that was not anger so much as absolute clarity. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She told him she had not come to Charleston only to open a branch office. He had earned the full truth of that, now. 3 years earlier, she had hit a wall trying to trace the origins of Summer Current. She had let it go because she had no leverage and no witness. Then she had needed a rideshare on a Friday night in July, and the name on the receipt had given her both. "I found a secondary access card," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "Issued 3 weeks before your termination. Same clearance level as yours. It was never mentioned in the investigation. The technician it was assigned to left the company 4 days after you were fired. I have the server entry log showing that card was used the night of the alleged theft, not yours." Owen looked at the folder and did not open it. "There's also a timestamp error in the security footage," she continued. 11 minutes, enough to have been edited." The room was quiet for a moment. Outside the harbor was flat and white under the midday heat. "They planned it," Owen said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." He stood up and walked to the window. She gave him the silence. Then he turned around, and what came out was not gratitude. "You've known pieces of this for 3 years," he said. "You come to Charleston, you hire me, you show up at my daughter's science fair, and the whole time you're building a case file." His voice was level, but there was something stripped and raw underneath it. "Was any of it real, or am I just the most useful witness you've managed to locate?" Adeline didn't look away. "In the beginning," she said, "you were both." The honesty of it landed harder than a denial would have. "And now?" he asked. "Now it's not the same," she said. "But I can't make you believe that. You have to decide it yourself." Owen said nothing. He picked up his jacket, folded the envelope back into the pocket, and left. He didn't contact her for 2 days. Adeline did not call him. She had meant what she said. She would not chase him into a trust he hadn't chosen yet. She kept working. She reviewed the documents. She waited. On the 3rd day, Owen walked into her office without an appointment and stood in the doorway with the particular stillness of a man who has made a decision that cost him something. "If you still want to move forward," he said, "I'm in." Adeline nodded once. "Then let me show you the rest." She spread the full file across the conference table. Access logs, an internal email chain referencing the Marlowe situation 2 weeks before the alleged incident. A draft memo outlining the creative relaunch of Summer Current with Serafina Vale listed as lead strategist, dated 4 days before Owen's termination. Owen stood over the documents for a long time without speaking. Then the office door opened. Serafina Vale walked in with the purposeful stride of someone arriving for a scheduled meeting. She had an appointment with Adeline that afternoon to align on the glass pavilion press arrangements, a detail neither Owen nor Adeline had anticipated. She stopped when she saw him. The phone call she'd been mid-sentence on ended without a goodbye. The 3 of them stood in a silence that had 8 years of weight in it. Serafina's eyes moved to the documents on the table. Something in her face went through several changes very quickly, before settling into an expression Owen recognized from years ago. The one she wore when she had already decided how she was going to handle a situation. "You shouldn't have come back," she said. Owen opened his mouth to respond. His phone rang. It was Lila's summer program supervisor. His daughter had collapsed during outdoor activities and was being taken to the hospital. The hospital was air-conditioned to the point of cold, which felt wrong after weeks of relentless summer heat. Owen sat in a plastic chair beside Lila's bed in the pediatric ward and did not move for a very long time. She was stable. Heat exhaustion compounded by a respiratory infection she'd been quietly developing for days without telling him because she hadn't wanted to miss the outdoor sessions. The doctor said she would recover fully with rest and fluids and a few days indoors. He said it kindly. Owen nodded and thanked him and waited until the man had left the room before pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. Lila slept. Her breathing was shallow but even. Someone had braided her hair back off her face, and Owen didn't know who, and felt for a reason he couldn't entirely explain, an almost unbearable gratitude for that small, anonymous kindness. He stayed through the afternoon and into the evening. He called Caleb to let him know. He did not call Adeline. She came anyway. He heard her before he saw her. A brief exchange with the nurse at the ward desk, a question about the room number. Then she appeared in the doorway, carrying a reusable bag, and paused there, reading the room before she entered it. She had changed out of her work clothes into something simpler, and she looked less like a CEO and more like a person. She set the bag down on the bedside table without comment. Inside was a children's book on bioluminescent sea creatures. A small handheld fan in yellow, the color Lila had mentioned once in passing, weeks ago, in a conversation Adeline had apparently been paying closer attention to than Owen realized. And a container of cold cucumber soup from the deli on Rutledge that Lila had declared her favorite on the one occasion they'd passed it together. Adeline sat down in the chair on the opposite side of the bed and said nothing. She didn't explain herself. She didn't apologize for arriving uninvited. She didn't try to fill the silence with reassurances or strategy or anything at all. She just sat there in the cold fluorescent light of the pediatric ward, present in the way that people are present when they are not performing presence, but simply providing it. After a long while, Owen spoke. Not about the case. Not about Serafina or Benedict or any of it. He told her about the year after Lila was born. He told her how Serafina had contacted him through a lawyer and told him plainly that if he attempted to establish paternity or contest the adoption filing, she would instruct her family's legal team to push for criminal prosecution on the Harborline data theft charge. The civil case had been dropped, but the criminal exposure had never fully closed. She had known exactly where the pressure point was. He told her how he had sold his car, his camera equipment, a drafting table he'd had since graduate school, and borrowed $4,000 from Caleb to cover the legal costs. How the process had taken 9 months. How he had driven to the foster placement address on a February morning and met a 7-week-old girl who looked at him with complete indifference to everything that had happened to bring them both to that moment. How he had driven home with her in a borrowed car seat and sat in the parking lot of his apartment building for 20 minutes because he was afraid to go inside, and then gone inside anyway because she needed to be fed. Adeline listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, the ward was quiet around them. Lila stirred slightly in her sleep and then settled. This wasn't only about a campaign, Adeline said. No, Owen said. It never was. She leaned forward with her elbows on her knees. Then what they did doesn't stop at a civil settlement. What they did to you and to her, that's a pattern. And if we don't document it completely, it doesn't end. It just waits for the next person. Owen looked at his daughter. Her small face was relaxed in sleep in the way that children's faces are, without the particular vigilance that waking life requires of them. He thought about a moment from earlier that week, before the hospital, before everything, when Lila had come home from camp quieter than usual. She'd heard something there. It had taken 2 days and a bowl of cereal at the kitchen table for it to surface. "Dad," she had said, not looking up from her spoon. "One of the kids at camp said you used to be a criminal, that you stole something from a company." Owen had gone very still. "Is that true?" she asked. Her voice was careful, in the way children's voices are. When they are asking the question they are most afraid to ask. "No," he said, "it's not true." She had looked at him then, directly, the way she always did when she needed to take a reading. "Then why do people believe it?" He hadn't had a good answer. He had told her that sometimes the truth needs someone brave enough to protect it, and she had nodded and gone back to her cereal. But the question had stayed with him, the way the questions children ask always stay with you, because they cut straight to the thing you've been dancing around for years. Now he looked at Lila across the hospital bed, at the small, handheld fan turning slowly in the yellow case Adeline had remembered to bring. Sometimes the truth needs someone brave enough to protect it. He'd said it to his daughter. It was time he believed it himself. He looked at Adeline. "Tell me what you need from me," he said. Lila came home on a Wednesday. She was quieter than usual for the first day, moving through the apartment in her pajamas with the careful deliberateness of someone recalibrating after an interruption. By Thursday evening, she was at the kitchen table with her sketchbook, drawing what appeared to be an anatomically detailed illustration of a sea urchin, and Owen decided she was going to be fine. The glass pavilion event was in 4 days. Adeline had presented the plan clearly. She would use her position as the hosting CEO to formally introduce the findings at the partnership announcement. The documents would be distributed to 3 journalists before the event. Benedict Crowe and Serafina Vale would both be present. The setting was public. The audience was influential. and the presence of media meant that whatever happened in that room would not be easily buried afterward. Owen understood the logic. He also understood that the last time he had stood in a room full of influential people and tried to tell the truth, he had left without a career, a fiancé, or a future. He told Adeline he needed to think about it. She said that was reasonable and did not press him. He spent 2 days thinking about very little else. He drove his delivery route and thought about it. He sat on the fire escape in the evenings while Lila slept and thought about it. He turned it over the way you turn over a stone you're not sure you want to look under, knowing that whatever is there has been there the whole time, and that not looking has never once made it go away. On Friday morning, Lila found him at the kitchen table with his coffee gone cold and his eyes fixed on the middle distance. She sat down across from him in the particular way she had, spine straight, chin level, as though she were about to conduct a formal interview. "Are you scared?" she asked. Owen looked at her. Yes. She considered this with appropriate seriousness. "You always tell me that being scared of something and doing it anyway is where brave actually lives." "I know I say that. You say it because it's true." "I know that too." Lila tilted her head slightly. "You also tell me that bullies get to decide who you are only if you let them." Owen was quiet for a moment. "You've been storing these up." "I have a good memory," she said, and went to get herself a bowl of cereal. He called Adeline that afternoon and told her he would be there. Getting dressed for the glass pavilion required borrowing a suit from Caleb Rourke, who was roughly the same height but broader in the shoulder, which meant the jacket fit imperfectly but adequately. Caleb stood in Owen's kitchen doorway, watching him adjust the collar, and said with the directness of a man who had been his friend through the worst of it, "You look like someone about to do something that matters." Owen said, "Let's hope so." The Charleston Glass Pavilion sat at the edge of the harbor, its floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water. The whole room lit warm and golden on summer evenings, in the way that made everything inside it look more important than it might otherwise be. By the time Owen arrived, the space was full. Linen blazers, silk dresses, the particular ambient sound of an industry gathering that believed itself to be celebrating something. He moved through the room steadily. He saw Benedict Crow across the space before Benedict saw him. Then Benedict turned, and his expression went from satisfaction to something colder and more focused in the span of a second. He crossed the room with the unhurried authority of someone who had never learned to be anything other than certain. "I'll give you this much," Benedict said, his voice low and even, carrying just far enough. "You've got nerve showing up here." He raised his voice slightly, addressing the nearest cluster of guests with the ease of a man who had controlled narratives professionally for 30 years. "Ladies and gentlemen, some of you may recognize Owen Marlowe. A cautionary tale the industry had the good sense to move past." The room went quiet, in the particular way rooms go quiet when something is shifted from celebration to spectacle. Owen stood in the center of it and did not look away. The silence stretched. Benedict held it with the comfort of a man who had used public humiliation as a professional tool for decades. Around him, faces turned toward Owen with the careful neutrality of people who had not yet decided which way the room was going. Owen let the silence run its full length. Then he spoke, and his voice was steady in a way that had nothing to do with the absence of fear and everything to do with having already decided. "I'm not here to cause a scene," he said. "I'm here because the truth belongs in the same room as the people who buried it. That's all." Benedict smiled the kind of smile that is meant to diminish. The truth. He turned slightly toward the room, performing ease. The truth, as the industry record clearly shows, is that this man was terminated for cause 8 years ago, following a data theft investigation. Whatever revisionist narrative he's been, Mr. Crow. Adeline's voice came from the front of the room, clear and unhurried. She had positioned herself near the presentation podium, and she moved forward now with the particular authority of someone who owns the room because they built what's in it. She was dressed simply, navy, minimal jewelry, and she carried a document folder that she set open on the podium without ceremony. "I'd like to take a few minutes before the formal announcement," she said, addressing the room rather than Benedict, "because some of what we're here to celebrate tonight is built on a foundation I think deserves to be examined more carefully before we continue." The room was very still. She walked through it without theatrics. The secondary access card issued 3 weeks before Owen's termination, same clearance level, never entered into evidence. The timestamp discrepancy in the security footage, 11 minutes, enough to indicate editing. The departure of the assigned technician 4 days after the termination. The internal email chain referencing the Marlowe situation 14 days before the alleged incident occurred. And finally, the original concept documents for some are current. Sketches, copy drafts, a development journal with dated entries spanning 8 months, all in Owen's hand, all predating the campaign's internal launch by more than a year. These were not difficult to find, Adeline said. They were only difficult to look for if you already knew what you would find. Benedict stepped forward, his voice stripped of its earlier warmth. "This is not the appropriate venue for—" "You made it the appropriate venue," Owen said quietly, "when you introduced me to the room." Benedict turned to Serafina. The room turned to Serafina. She was standing near the window, slightly apart from the main cluster of guests, and she had been standing there silently since Adeline had begun speaking. She was composed in the way that people are composed when they are using every available resource to remain so. Benedict's look was a command. "Say something. Fix this." Serafina looked at him. Then she looked at Owen. Owen didn't look at her with anger. He didn't perform betrayal or demand an accounting. He looked at her the way a person looks at someone they once knew well, with the exhaustion of someone who has carried a weight that was never theirs to begin with. Patient, tired, and somewhere underneath it, still hurt. The way you can still be hurt by something that happened long enough ago that you stopped expecting it to surface. She had prepared for anger. She had not prepared for that. Her eyes moved to the document folder on the podium, then to the faces in the room, then for a moment that lasted longer than it should have, to somewhere that wasn't the glass pavilion at all. She was thinking about a February morning she had never let herself think about directly. About a legal filing she had made and then stopped letting herself examine. About a child she had been told by people she had allowed to tell her what to think that she was not capable of raising. About all the years she had spent building a version of events that she could live inside without the walls closing in. The walls were closing now. When she spoke, her voice was even. Barely. "Benedict Crowe approached my family's firm 6 weeks before Owen's termination," she said. "He needed the campaign. He needed Owen removed. My family had exposure in another matter that Harborline was positioned to manage quietly, and the arrangement was that I would provide a supporting statement and take creative lead on the relaunch." She paused. "I knew Owen hadn't done what they said he did. I told myself it was business. I told myself he would land somewhere." Another pause, longer. "I told myself a lot of things for a long time." Her voice broke on the last sentence, not dramatically, just at the edge where the control gave out. "I was wrong," she said. "About all of it." The room held its breath. The man Serafina had been scheduled to announce an engagement to at the end of the evening set his champagne glass on a nearby tray and walked toward the exit without speaking to her. Benedict began a sentence that did not finish coherently. 2 of the journalists Adeline had briefed beforehand were already moving. What followed happened over weeks, not minutes. Harborline Strategies opened a formal internal investigation before the end of the month. Benedict Crowe resigned his chairmanship 12 days later, ahead of the board's vote to remove him. The criminal exposure on Owen's file was reviewed and formally closed. A civil settlement followed substantial and accompanied by a public statement of correction that ran in 3 industry publications. Owen read the statement on his phone while sitting at the kitchen table across from Lila, who was eating toast and reading about migratory patterns of loggerhead sea turtles. He set the phone down. "Good news?" Lila asked without looking up. "Yeah," Owen said. "Good news." Lila started at Seabrook Young Scholars Academy on a Tuesday in late August. Owen drove her on the first morning and watched her walk through the front entrance carrying a backpack that was slightly too large for her and a clearly homemade field journal with her name written on the cover in careful block letters. She did not look back. She had her father's particular quality of forward motion, the ability to move toward a thing without performing the moving. He sat in the car for a few minutes after she disappeared inside. Then he drove to his new office. The position was Director of Creative at a small independent firm called Tidewater Works, which specialized in environmental and community campaigns along the southeast coast. It was not a large company. The conference room held 8 people uncomfortably. The coffee machine was unreliable. 3 of his 5 colleagues had previously left larger firms for reasons that suggested they too had a specific tolerance for how creative work could be treated. Owen found he liked them enormously. The apartment changed in the months that followed, slowly, the way good things tend to. The walls filled in. Lila's drawings went up first, tide pool diagrams. A large watercolor of a brown pelican that she spent 3 weekends on. A series of small sketches of horseshoe crabs in various states of scientific annotation. Owen's design work went up beside them, not framed prints or portfolio pieces, but working drafts, color studies, the kind of evidence of ongoing thought that makes a space feel inhabited rather than decorated. A photograph appeared on the bookshelf sometime in September. 2 people and a child at the harbor, caught mid-laugh by Caleb's phone camera on a Sunday afternoon when no one had been trying to document anything. Owen kept meaning to put it in a proper frame. He kept not getting around to it, and after a while, he decided he liked it better as it was. Serafina called in October. She had been in therapy since August. She had volunteered this information in a brief message, not as mitigation, but as context, which Owen recognized as a meaningful distinction. She asked if she could meet Lila. Not alone, not without structure. She understood what she was asking. She said she would accept whatever answer he gave. Owen thought about it for several days. He talked to a family counselor who worked with Lila's school. He thought about what Lila deserved, which was not a simple calculation. It included the right to know where she came from and the right to be protected from any version of that knowledge that arrived before she was ready for it. He called Serafina back and outlined the terms: a neutral setting, accounts were present, no pressure on Lila to respond in any particular way, and the pace set entirely by the child. Serafina agreed without qualification. The first meeting lasted 40 minutes. Lila asked 3 questions, 2 of which were about Serafina's opinion of marine biology as a career. On the drive home, Wyval was quiet for a while and then said, "She seemed nervous." "She was," Owen said. "That's okay," Lila said and looked out the window. "I was a little nervous too." Owen kept his eyes on the road. "That's okay too," he said. Adeline did not move in or announce herself or arrive with fanfare of any kind. She was simply, gradually present. She came for dinner on Thursdays because that was when Owen made the corn chowder that Lila had declared the best thing she had ever eaten, a verdict she delivered with the same authoritative finality she applied to scientific conclusions. She came to Lila's first public presentation at Seabrook in November and sat in the 3rd row and did not make a production of being there. She and Owen walked the waterfront on Sunday evenings when the city had finally released the heat of the week, and the harbor went quiet and dark. They talked about everything and nothing, the way people do when they have passed through something serious together and come out the other side still wanting to be in the same place. Owen did not rush any of it. He had learned, at considerable expense, the difference between something that looks stable and something that actually is. and he was no longer in a hurry to confuse the two. The following summer, on an evening in late July, Owen took Adeline to the boardwalk trail at the edge of the nature preserve south of the city. A wooden path that wound through cordgrass and sea oats and ended at a platform overlooking the water. The sky was doing something extravagant with the light, the way Carolina skies do in summer. Going gold, and then amber, and then a particular shade of rose that doesn't have a practical name. He took the business card out of his wallet. He had kept it in there for a year, his own card, the one he had left on her entryway table that first night. Returned to him in a small envelope she had sent to the Marison Finch office the week after the glass pavilion. She hadn't written anything inside. She hadn't needed to. The edges were soft with handling. The handwriting was still clear. Hope the morning is easier. Oh. That was the night I thought I was helping a stranger, he said. I didn't know you'd already been looking for me. I didn't know any of it. He looked at her. I just knew it was the right thing to do. He reached into his jacket pocket and brought out a simple ring, a narrow gold band with a single small stone. Nothing excessive, nothing that tried too hard. I don't want to make a speech, he said. I just want to know if you'll stay. Adeline looked at the ring, then at him, then at the water briefly, the way she did when she was making sure of something. I was already staying, she said. That evening, the three of them walked the harbor. Owen, Adeline, and Lila, who had appointed herself the authority on which ice cream flavors were acceptable for the season, and was making her case at length. The city glowed behind them. The water moved dark and easy ahead. They had not erased what had happened. They had not pretended the years had been other than they were. But they had done something that Owen had not for a long time believed was still available to him. They had simply decided to continue. Owen Marlowe lost his career, his name, the woman he loved, and almost his daughter, all because he was too honest to play the game and too decent to become someone who could. And yet, he never stopped showing up, not for his work, not for Lila, and on a summer night when it would have been easier to keep driving, not for a stranger outside a restaurant who needed someone to stop. That's the thing about people like Owen. They don't make grand gestures or long speeches. They just keep doing the right thing quietly, even when it costs them. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the world eventually catches up to what they were worth all along. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because every week we bring you stories exactly like this one, about ordinary people carrying extraordinary weight, and what happens when they finally put it down. We'll see you in the next one.